You can let the press in.
You said something, David?
Hold on. Kadaki you're talking to. You heard me, Kadaki? Let the press in.
Well, very good morning to you, and welcome to this press conference of the Working People's Alliance. I'm chairman of the Working People's Alliance and your host for today, for today's press briefing. We have Dr. David Hine of the Working People's Alliance. Dennis Canterbury. For today's briefing, we'll have the presentation of our conference by Brother Ray. Brother Kidaki Amsterdam is also the organizing secretary of the Working People's Alliance, and Dr. David Hine. So I hand you over to the principals to present his concerns of the Working People's Alliance. Go right ahead, gentlemen. David? Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Yes. It is this transgression that Dr. Hines' recent commentary targets. He zeroed in on the African Guyanese recruiters and used everyday folk language to reinforce the seriousness of the practice. Walter Rodney, in his time, described these actors as, quote, lackeys, soup drinkers, misfits, stooges, and square pegs in round holes, end quote. In addition to Dr. Hines' quote, lick bottom, we end the Rodney description cited above. We add, the Rodney description cited above. WPA welcomes the so-called ERC investigation of Dr. Hines' comments. We intend to use the trial, if it materializes, to put the ERC on trial for its gross dereliction of duty when it comes to real expressions of racial hostility and hate in the public space. The ERC must say whether its remit is to police public utterances by opposition figures. It must say whether the intra-racial self-criticism amounts to sowing racial division. It must say whether government officials and members of the ruling party enjoys immunity from ERC's gaze. WPA takes this opportunity to condemn in the strongest terms the ERC's latest revelation that it could not locate the accuser in the Ivor Thorn saga. Could the ERC locate the ministers who took the call from the accused? This entire episode makes a mockery of the ERC's investigative process. WPA is forced to conclude that the ERC, like other state agencies, has become captive of the PPP's requests, of the PPP's quest for domination of state and society.
In response to calls from some quarters for me to apologize for the statements made on my podcast, which have been given legs by the PPP, I wish to categorically say that I will not make any apology. I ask, what am I apologizing for? I have not offended any ethnic group. All I did was to caution some individuals of my own ethnic group about a practice that could bring dishonor to the group. My sin lies in my courage to raise in the open space a dangerous development whereby the ruling party is using some of its new converts to go into selective communities to solicit the votes of poor people in exchange for government and state resources. Such action is called vote buying, a practice that is not permitted by the Constitution or by statutes and flies in the face of democratic engagement. In passing, let me say that I was part of the Walter Rodney cadre of freedom fighters. We fought for the right of Guyanese to join any political party of their choice. We fought for the right of political parties to recruit in any community. I will fight to protect and preserve those rights till the day I die. But we did not die and go to jail for the right of political parties to use state resources to buy votes. I will fight against such practice till the day I die. My critics are preoccupied with my descriptive words, but they ignore the message. I chose to use folk language. The words used are borrowed from the title of a calypso song by Trinidadian calypsonian Krokro, in 2011, in which he scolded Afro-Trinidadian members of Indo-Trinidadian-led parties for denigrating African leaders. I have not given 50 years of service to the struggle for justice for some selective outragers to tell me how I must express myself. I have earned the right to scold members of my race for potentially and actually hurting the race.
The WPA's meeting with the GTUC. A delegation from the WPA met with the leadership of the Guyana TUC last Wednesday to discuss cooperation between political parties and to ensure that the upcoming elections are free and fair. The two sides agreed that GCOM's continued resistance to the use of biometrics and cleaning the severely bloated voters list are barriers to that outcome. The two sides also agreed that public agitation is needed to dramatize discontent with GCOM's stance and to force that body to change course.
WPA endorses the recent Transparency International report on corruption in Guyana. Transparency International is spot on in its conclusion that the government has become captive of economic and political elites. This then leads to the reluctance or inability of the government to follow the rule of law and its resort to governance by fear and force. In the end, the country has descended into autocracy and authoritarianism. The PPP's praxis of domination and the acquisition of power by any means necessary is fertile ground for capture by elites. The convergence of the economic elites' thirst for unfettered wealth, the political elites' desire for ethno-political domination, and the PPP's compulsion to rule Guyana gives rise to the outcome which Transparency International observed. Guyana's corruption trajectory begins at the time of elections. As was evidenced in 2020, Guyana's electoral process is seriously compromised by the infusion of mega financing by known and unknown sources. As Vice President Jabdio boasted only recently, the PPP does not have to depend on state finances to finance its electoral campaign. WPA asked rhetorically, where does the big money used to hire high-priced consultants and lobbyists come from? Economic elites finance electoral campaigns in exchange for state favors, part of which is pumped back into subsequent election campaigns. No wonder the PPP is hostile to stringent campaign finance regulations and laws. WPA takes this opportunity to call for campaign finance laws. It is very important at this time in our political history that we get rid of the scourge of corruption. And one way to begin is to pass campaign finance regulation and laws. The PPP has increasingly become captive of an Indo-centric elite, which has long advocated for Guyana becoming an Indian outpost. They have openly urged Indian natives to come to Guyana to make money. Recently, they have sold the PPP the idea of assimilating African Guyanese and Amerindians under an Indo-PPP political tent called One Guyana, which has been fully embraced by the party and the government in power. The upcoming election is set to be the test of the success or failure of this venture. Thank you very much.
I understand that we have had a sound issue at the start of the press conference, and therefore I'll do the read of the section of the statement that I read. The WPA notes the noise and crocodile tears from the PPP and its allies over remarks made by Dr. David Hines on his podcast, Politics 101. We also note the tremendous outpouring of support, particularly on social media, in support of the sentiments expressed by Dr. Hines, touching a nerve. WPA wishes to lend its voice to the chorus of support for our colleague, and to categorically endorse his message and the sharp language he used to convey his message. WPA has agonized over the emergence of overt vote buying by the PPP, particularly in the African Guyanese community. We find the utilization of recent African Guyanese converts to the PPP to solicit the votes of mainly African Guyanese youth in exchange for government handouts most nauseating. We view this practice as a violation of democratic norms that would, in the long run, reduce the value and integrity of the vote. Further, it is an insult to the dignity of African Guyanese who are being coerced by a governing party whose ultimate aim can only be ethnic domination. The government cynically accuses Dr. Hines of insulting African Guyanese who do not share his views, and in the process deny them the right of associating with any party of their choice. Nothing is further from the truth. WPA, from its birth in 1974, has championed the right of every Guyanese to join any party. In fact, people who joined our party in our early days were routinely harassed. Some lost their jobs and were jailed. To this day, many of our supporters prefer to offer their support privately out of fear of being victimized by the current ruling party. WPA and other opposition parties are the victims of the scourge of official denial of the right of association. During the 1970s, WPA had to fight against Dr. Jagan's PPP attempt to prevent the party from organizing in Indian Guyanese communities. We argued then, as we argue now, that all parties have a right to organize in any community, regardless of their ethnic composition. Anyone who follows Dr. Hines' podcast can attest to the fact that he constantly affirms the freedom and right of all Guyanese to join the party of their choice and the right of all parties to freely campaign in and recruit members from any community. WPA equally affirms the right of citizens to access government services and other public resources without being coerced to join the ruling party. Unfortunately, the present government has normalized the practice of coercing citizens outside its support base to join its ranks in exchange for jobs, contracts, and other government services. Vice President Jagdeo openly tells African Guyanese that if they need, quote, development, unquote, they must join the PPP. In pursuit of their campaign, the PPP has enticed African Guyanese naive professionals, along with disgruntled and compromised opposition leaders, to serve as recruiters of what it euphemistically refers to as crossover votes. End.
Gentlemen, you hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I had my computer updated automatically, so I got shut down for a while. So let me apologize for that. So I got back in, but I heard Kidaki reading again.
So the press statement has been read. I think we go over now to Brother Ogun and Brother Canterbury for their contributions.
Thank you. Brother Ogun, you may go ahead. Brother Takuma, your comments, please.
You have to unmute yourself, Brother Takuma, and Brother Dennis, you can unmute at the same time.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Thank you, Brother Chair, members of the press and the media in general, and those watching from their homes. The WPA sees this press conference as a very important and unique press conference since we have begun press conferences. This press conference, in our view, represents an escalation of state violence against the African community and the WPA. And we are not fooled by the facade that is being done by the government and its propaganda agents using the language chosen by Dr. Hines as the problem. We have been around the political struggle for umpteen times, and we are no strangers to this kind of engagement. And we know what is offensive to the PPP is not the language, it is the political intent of the WPA's and David Hines' articulation advocacy, which is designed to have political consequences which the rulers recognize will endanger their two main objectives in these elections, which are one, to win and to continue in office, and two, to win the elections with a significant African support. And we in the WPA and Dr. Hines are committed to ensure that on both scores, they don't achieve their objective. And that is what is at stake, and that is what is driving their behavior, and not the question of language. They don't care about Africans to that extent. But what they care about is the damage being done to the sinister plan to entrap Africans in the project of a new form of African enslavement. And we in the WPA will only when this government give a commitment that it is prepared, firstly, that it is against Indian domination, and two, it is prepared to use the oil wealth to correct historical injustices among all ethnic groups in the country, and in particular Africans and Amerindians who have suffered the worst out of the colonial exploitation and governance arrangements. To talk outside those terms and to engage in the economic practices that the government is engaged in will only lead to ethnic domination, or one-sided ethnic domination. And we are not at all impressed by the so-called shouts about oneness and one Guyana. It's empty rhetoric. The WPA is also concerned with what is clear to us. And we have come to this position after watching the PPP behavior when they came to power from 1992, and more importantly, their behavior since 2020 in the context of Guyana having oil revenue, and in a situation where we have enough money, and we'll have enough money to seriously deal for the first time in our history with the economic deprivation of all our people. And the PPP seems to have worked out an economic arrangement which will keep Africans at the fringes of the economy and to ensure that we get the crumbs. And we believe that that is not a destiny for any section of the Guyanese population, given our history and more particularly the African population. And there must be a comprehensive economic plan and arrangements which explicitly speaks to correcting historical injustices among our people, ethnically. I want to say, as a person who participated in the struggle against Burnham, the restoration of democracy and fair and free elections, that what we have seen and how we have degenerated under the present PPP rule make a mockery of that struggle. And it does a disservice to Rodney and all the patriots who fought at that period. And for us to have to compare the Rodney period, this present period, in itself is an abomination. And one of the things that offends me personally is this new form of cultural aggression, ethnic cultural aggression, that has been implanted into the Guyanese political equation by people like Rafi Dev and those persons in which they borrow from the Israelis practice in America and elsewhere, that if you're critical of anything that Israel define as their interests, they use all their might, whether it's economic, politically, whether it's domestic, internationally, to knock you down. And I notice that this is the kind of practices that the PPP has been sold, and this is the kind of practices that the PPP seems to buy into. And we no longer engage in the old political engagement that reflects the period of Burnham and Javan and the Kwayanas. This is a new engagement of the Jagdios, the Alis, and the Nandalal. And none of them have any history of struggling and making any sacrifices for whatever they want to call it democracy, whether they want to call it free and fair elections, whether they want to call it human rights. They have never spent one day in prison for these noble things. And they have been a usurper of power, and they have used their hold on power to carry us to a very low place. And we in the WPA are committed, as we were in the Burnham period, we are committed in this present period to say no, and we will fight it with all our might. And we will pay whatever price we have to pay, because we believe it is a just cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Ogun. I now hand you over to Dr. Dennis Canterbury for his comments.
Thank you very much, Brother Chair. I think I would like to point our attention to the fact that this whole so-called controversy concerning Dr. Heinz's free speech should really be cast perhaps in a broader dimension of press freedom, because I would consider Dr. Heinz a journalist who operates a program called Politics 101. And as a journalist, he's entitled to free speech. And so they attempt to restrict his free speech, and by bringing him to a commission to inquire into his quote-unquote freedom to speak, could be interpreted as in an even broader way in terms of an attempt to continue to tie the WPA officials up into different forms of procedures by the state. Like when we look at the WPA, we have several of our, at least two of our colleagues who are engaged in court activities. They're tied up with the courts. And then now we will have, if they proceed with this, we will have Dr. Heinz now tied up in another inquiry, commission of an inquiry. And so this could very well be interpreted as a deliberate strategy, one, to keep us busy in other forms rather than have us focusing on what we do best, which is to observe and make poignant criticisms of the government, and at the same time, two, to restrict the freedom of speech. But then there is also the question of corruption that we mentioned in our press statement, the question of Transparency International. And I think that we have been calling, I know that we have been calling for due diligence and for feasibility studies. And one of the reasons why we've been calling for those things is precisely to curtail corruption. Because if we were to ensure that we carry out or do our homework in terms of the implementation of projects, it would serve in a large way, in large measure, to stem the tide of the leak of the workers or Guyanese people's money into the pockets of private individuals through corrupt channels. So I think that the statement made by the Transparency International, we correct and endorse that statement of corruption, and we would like to reiterate our call for there to be due diligence as a means to stem that, to help to stem the tide of corruption, as well as to carry out feasibility studies. We know of the recent payment of the cash transfers, of the cash payments, and all that confusion and so on with respect to that has to do with the fact that we haven't carried out proper feasibility studies. And we know that once you don't do those two things, then you open up channels for corruption. So this is why they're not doing it. They're not doing it because they can't get people to do it. They're not doing it because it would shut down their ability to steal people's money. And the other thing is that with respect to the meeting with the WPA and the TUC, I think that this is a real important development. And civil society organizations in Guyana should take heed of something like this, because the struggle for biometrics is a national one and should be embraced at that level. So civil society and our political institutions in Guyana, I think, should take note of these activities, and they should try to join in if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Canterbury, for your comments. We are now going to invite the press to indicate if you have a question, put up your hand, and then let you in to raise your concerns or ask your questions. The floor is now open to you, the media. Yes, Guyana Chronicle, identify by name. So, and go ahead.
Good morning, Naomi Paris here for the Chronicle. Is everybody hearing me?
Yes.
Yes.
Just speak a little louder, please.
All right, sure, no problem. My questions are for Mr. Hines. So you've already established that you won't be apologizing for your statements. So my question to you is, can you explain why you believe an apology is unnecessary, especially given the widespread criticisms and concerns raised by many that were affected by your words?
But I don't think that there is widespread. Most of the letters you see in the media come from DPI operatives and reliably informed. So I don't know where is the widespread condemnation. The usual suspects, that is the PPP and the allies, we expect them. But you go on social media and you will see the tremendous outpouring of support for me, our party, and the statements that I have made. I've been getting calls from all over Guyana, from even the interior, where people are telling me that the young people, the old people are repeating the words that I use. So I don't think there is any widespread condemnation of what I said. But you can't apologize if you commit no wrong. I have not committed any wrong. I have always been self-critical of African Guyanese. This is not anything new that I am doing. I have spent my entire political career of 50 years asking African Guyanese not to behave badly. And in this instance, some African Guyanese are behaving badly. And after giving service to the African Guyanese community for 50 years, I reserve the right to scold them and to use whatever language I feel is appropriate. So there is absolutely nothing to apologize for. Any apology is to apologize to the PPP. And I will not apologize to the PPP. If this episode has undermined the PPP, has caused harm to the PPP, then so be it. That is my intention.
Well, it seems as though you're only reading one set of comments, but moving on, do you understand how your refusal to apologize may deepen racial division in Guyana?
Divided who and who? Which group and which group? If you're dividing people racially, you must be dividing one group and another group. I am speaking to African Guyanese. Tell me, I have not said anything to Indian Guyanese or Amerindian or Portuguese and Chinese. In that sense, you could accuse me of dividing the race if my comments were directed at other ethnic groups. No, they were directed at my group, and I have that right.
Well, you also spoke in your program about Hindu Guyanese, and you have also spoken about Hindu Guyanese in the past. So
tell me what I said about Hindu Guyanese on that program.
You know what you said. I don't know.
No, you are the journalist. You have to tell me what I said, and I will respond. If you come in, you got to do your homework.
Like I said, I won't be repeating what you said. That's not
okay. Okay, but I said nothing about Hindu Guyanese on that program.
Are you? Well, could you clarify your stance on racial racism in Ghana? Do you feel your remarks accurately reflect the views you hold, or do you regret some aspects of what you said, even if you don't feel an apology is necessary?
I regret nothing. I am a scholar. I teach race. I know the definition of racism. Racism is a concept whereby someone believes his group, his or her ethnic group, is superior to another group. Racism is when someone who holds prejudice against another group uses his power or our power to carry out his or her prejudice. That is the definition of racism. And if you look at and listen to what I said, I never talked about the superiority of one group over the other. I certainly don't have institutional power to put my prejudices into practice. I am very clear about what I did. I spoke to my brothers and sisters as I've done since the 1974 when I entered politics. During the Burnham years, when our African brothers and sisters were doing things that we felt were not in the best interest of the group, when Indian Guyanese were complaining that African Guyanese were discriminated against them, I, David Hines, and my comrades in the WPA, including Walter Rodney, rebuked them. Walter Rodney called them lackeys. He called them misfits. He called them square pegs in round holes. He called them soup drinkers. The language that I use is not new. It has been around. So people don't care about language. People knows that. They use worse language. The president called me a clown in Boston. Did I go to the ARC and charge him with racism or ask him to apologize? No, I dealt with him man to man. President Jack Dio calls black women low life, Cattyus. Did Cattyus go to the ARC? The president has called me and my comrades, the vice president, fossils and geriatrics. Did we go crying to the ERC? Did we ask him for apology? No. You start the fight, we fight you back. And so this thing about me, insulting people, it's nonsense. And the government knows it. I have been the recipient. They call me Blackwood Man. Did I cry? I go to the ERC, please. They call me Blackwood Man. No, I take my blows and I give back blows. And that's the way it's going to be.
All right, just a follow-up question on what your colleague said. To be clear, Mr. Hines, are you a politician or a journalist?
I am not a journalist. I heard my colleague say that, and with all due respect, I am not a journalist. I'm an opinion shaper that uses the media, social media, but I'm not a journalist. But I think the essence of what my colleague is saying is that it is an assault on freedom of speech. You don't have to be a journalist for your freedom of speech to be assaulted. I'm a citizen, and I have the right to express myself. I am a political activist and a scholar. The term they use is scholar activist or activist scholar, whatever you can call it. But no, my colleague said I'm a journalist, and but the larger point he's making is that it's an assault on the right to free speech.
I stand corrected. Thank you.
Is that all?
Yes, that's all my questions for today.
Okay,
Thank you very much, Ms. Paris.
Any other questions from any other media house? So everything is clear. I didn't heard. Did we hear me?
Yeah,
Thanks.
yes, we are. We just want to say, as if there are no questions forthcoming from the media at present, just want to say that attempts to silence the WPA is nothing new. We have been through that for 50 years. We are accustomed to it. We are fighters. They tell us that we are a party without members. Well, this must be the greatest party without numbers in the world. Because every time we open our mouth, we are doing something to the government, we are doing something to somebody, then we must have some traction in the society. You can't have it both ways. It's either we are known entities, or we do have the capacity to influence public opinion. I think the government is admitting that we in the WPA have the capacity to influence public opinion, and that is our intention. We want to ask our African Guyanese sisters and brothers to stop using our community to satisfy their personal gains and to satisfy their new, as Walter Rodney would put it, their new masters. We have absolutely no problem. If anybody wants to go and join the PPP, that's their right. That's their right. People move from party to party. That's their right. If I were to join, what to announce tomorrow, that I am joining the PPP, there would be 100 journalists at the press conference because I am a public figure who has been in the WPA for 50 years. And I am now moving to another party. I am bound to answer why. Why after 50 years? Am I going after personal gain? As the PPP offered me something, the media and public would want to know that. And I can tell you, the African community, if that were to happen, they would do more than call me lick bottom. They would probably lynch me, and they would have a right to. Because after standing in their ranks for 50 years and defending them against government tyranny, defending them against PPP tyranny, and now I'm going to the PPP, they must ask themselves, and they have every right to haul me over the coals. They have every right to ostracize me because they would feel that I have deceived them for 50 years. So those other brothers and sisters who want to jump ship and go to the other side must expect questions. But more than that, if they jump ship and go, who cares? It happens every day. But you do not go into your community and then recruit your young brothers and sisters and try to buy their vote. The vote is a sacred thing. The vote is something blood was shed for. And you are now reducing the African Guyanese vote to a market arrangement where you give them $1 million and say, give me your vote. That is sacrilegious. And so therefore, whether Indians do it, or Africans do it, or Amerindians do it, they will hear my voice. But we have a greater responsibility to raise our voice louder when Africans are doing it. And if this practice continues, where the PPP buys vote, when the government changes, and the other side now start going to Indian Guyanese and buying their votes, I am sure the present rulers will be up in arms against it. They would call them the worst kind of Nimakaran. Go check what Nimakaran means. Go check what the PPP call Ramjatan and Nagamutu and Uprajnarain and others who went over to the opposition side. They call them worse names than I have called these African Guyanese brothers and sisters. They call Nimakaran traitors. They chased. Mr. Jagdio said, when they come into your communities, chase them. I have not said yet to our community to chase our brothers and sisters. But Jagdio said that those Indians who have gone across to the opposition, when they come in your communities, chase them. What did the ERC do? Did the ERC say they investigated that comment? What did the journalists do? Did they go to Jagdio and tell him to apologize? He would tell them the same thing that I say. He has nothing to apologize to.
Brother Chair, I would like to point out that Walter Rodney in his defense of Arnold Rampersad, said very clearly that the jury was made up of 12 strapping black men put there to hang the brother. So Walter did make a criticism when blacks are used against their own interest, as was glaring in this case. Now, the PPP at that time didn't criticize Walter or the WPA for that statement. In effect, they welcomed it as a statement of facts. I'd just like to point that out.
Brother Rohit, you reference Arnold Rampersad. For the young people who have no idea what you're talking about, quickly recap that scenario.
Arnold Rampersad was held on the charge that of shooting at the toll gate in Bordeaux, and Walter, the WPA,
an African soldier at the police at the toll gate on the correct team.
And the trial was brought to Georgetown in front of a jury made up of, as Walter pointed out, 12 strapping black men. So Walter was very clear that whenever his race was engaged in activities that were not beneficial to their cause, he would call them out. And the Arnold Rampersad case, Arnold Rampersad wrote to about Walter after Walter's death, thanking Walter's family, I think, for making his freedom real.
And not only Walter Rodney, but the UC Quayana and Clive Thomas and other African leaders, Father Malcolm Rodriguez, Portuguese, Dr. Rupert Rupnarain, they would go up to the quarantine and fight for Brother Takumo Gonse, who's here with us. All of them fought for an Indian to be released, and we felt African people were being used to hang an Indian man. And we took to the street corners and said, not in our name. Walter Rodney at Durban and the Windsor Road said, whatever happened to Africans, when we came out of enslavement, we came out with our dignity. And we must not use that dignity to hurt people, including our own race. We have a history of speaking to black people when they do wrong. And when they do right, we say they do right. We are clean when it comes to dealing with our race. And I continue in that tradition. I continue. I think it's a political sin. It's a moral sin to be go catching your little brothers and sisters and selling them and urging them to sell their vote for $1 million contract or something like that. It has to stop. It has to stop. And no ERC will turn me away from fighting against that. And if any of those brothers or sisters who have gone over to the PPP, if they are attacked wrongfully, I will defend them. I had Mr. James Bond on my program. I hope the Chronicle noticed that. I was critical of him, but the next night, he came on to my program and he explained himself. I didn't agree with him, but he explained himself. And on Tuesday, tomorrow night, Mr. Leonard Craig is coming on. That is the morality, the political morality that I represent. Those brothers are not my enemies. And they're free to come on to my program to explain themselves, but I am free to be critical of them.
Thank you, gentlemen, for the still see no indication from the press that there are other questions. And therefore, if there are any closing comments, I will open that to the panel just to have you say your final words, and then we can close the conference.
I was even a bit hesitant to raise this point because sometimes I think in doing this, we're degrading Walter and the struggle. But because we deal with a younger generation who really didn't participate in that struggle, and the PPP is taking advantage of the young peoples across the country of all races, the ignorance as it relates to the struggle in Guyana. And on this, and I want to narrow on this whole question of language. I grew up in the colonial days listening to PPP meeting and political meeting. I remember one of the famous slogans of the time. It is slipping me now, but it's a slogan by Brinley Ben. I think he said, and if somebody remember it could help me, it was easier to stop something than to stop communism.
Yes.
I can't remember what was the first part of it. And a lot of graphic use of language. I remember hearing Boredom sister, tearing Boredom apart. Beware, my brother Forbes, beware. And the Guyanese political landscape was has always been colorful in the use of Creole language and folk culture. And to see that the PPP is trying to reduce us to a level that is unprecedented in the history of the country. We did this in the colonial days when Walter was speaking, and Walter, an African revolutionary and African political activist, described Burnham, who was the primarily African leader at the time. So anything Burnham touched to want to shit. And all of those who are criticizing us today about crude language, they were clapping. So when a black opposition element use folk language to discredit a major African leader, it was good business, political business for them. But now they want to define things in such a narrow terms that they want to take away from us a very effective cultural weapon that has become part and parcel of our liberation. And this is cultural aggression. And we have to stand up and push back on it. They can't. I'm around for a long time. I've never heard African people telling Indian leaders how they must speak to their people. Never, ever, ever. And this new abomination that Indian leaders and the right activists think they have a right to tell us how we must speak to our people. I mean, this is worse than colonialism in a certain sense.
Yeah, and I just want to, in closing, add to Brother Ogun's sentiments there. These people who are talking about Walter Rodney have never read one word. The President Ali has never read one word from Walter Rodney. If he did, he would not say that Walter Rodney would not use the language that I use. You know, they are empty in terms of their capacity to understand history. And so therefore they're leading this nation down this path. And we are going to stand up. I don't matter to me. Jail don't frighten us, you know. You all can be rest assured of that. Jail don't frighten us in the WPA. You know, saying that you're going to kill me, don't frighten me. We've been through burning and come back. And we are going to use that capital that we have amassed to defend the poor and the powerless in Guyana. We want to make that absolutely clear. Absolutely clear. Look, I went on the Chronicle webpage. And under the story that Chronicle did condemning me, 99.99% of the respondents were Indo-Guyanese. And if the government changes tomorrow, and a new government comes in, those Indian Guyanese will stop reading the Chronicle. You'll understand the kind of society that we live in. When I go under, let's say, a news source, the majority of comments are coming from African Guyanese, but it's more mixed. The point is that our people are divided. Public opinion is divided. And so when Indians condemn me, I expect that because it's part of the political script. When African Guyanese embrace me for what I said, I expect that because I'm speaking to their angst, I'm speaking to their anxiety. And they will embrace me because they're logical people, like Indian people are logical. And I just want to say, lick bottom is not my term. I borrowed it from Calypsonian Crow in 2011, reached to the finals of the Calypso competition in Trinidad with that Calypso. He reached the finals. That Calypso was played on the radio in Trinidad. Perhaps there is something about the Trinidadians that we have to understand. So that term is not my term. Before I made my commentary, I played the Calypso. I played the Calypso. I'm a student of Martin Carter. There's a line in one of his poems. He talks that when the moon comes out, only the horse could dance. Are we going to take Martin Carter to the ERC and say that he's using abusive language? The artists, the political activists, has licensed with our language. And I prepare to use it. I'm a student of folk language.
Thank you, gentlemen. If there are no other comments or questions, I want to thank the press, the media, for being with us this morning. And I want to thank the panelists for presenting the views of the working People's Alliance at this press conference. And the ERC, Dr. Hines, you remember they sent representatives to the UN General Assembly to debunk the claims being made that there is risk and discrimination against, particularly against Afro-Guyanese. So I don't know what the ERC is about, how they can justify their independence when it comes to racism and discrimination in there. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next week. Same time when we have another press conference of the working people. Do have a good afternoon.